The light within the Nexus conclave was ancient, a soft, silver luminescence that flowed from the living crystal lattice of the ceiling, bathing the chamber in the serene glow of a captured nebula. It was a light that had witnessed the seamless absorption of 1,000 star systems, the peaceful and absolute unification of countless species into the singular, harmonious consciousness of the Cathar Dominion. For eons, this chamber had been a place of quiet certainty, of decisions that rippled across galaxies like the slow, inevitable turn of a celestial body. But today, the silence was heavy, fractured by an undercurrent of something that the Cathar had not felt in millennia: dissonance. At the heart of the circular chamber, suspended in a gentle gravity well, floated the apex conductor, its physical form a cascade of iridescent filaments and solidified light, its thoughts flowing directly into the minds of the assembled conclave members. Around it, the elders, their bodies encased in ceremonial carapaces of polished obsidian, remained motionless, their own thoughts a tightly controlled chorus of disciplined focus. The subject of this profound disquiet was a species from a single, unremarkable yellow star system on the galactic fringe, a species that called themselves humans. The data streams projected in the air before each elder were a chaotic storm of contradictions. They showed a species capable of creating art of sublime complexity, music that could mirror the mathematical elegance of orbital mechanics, and philosophical treatises that touched upon the nature of reality itself. Yet these same streams showed them engaging in brutal, self-destructive warfare, poisoning their own planet, and existing in a state of perpetual political fragmentation. They were a cacophony, a species that had somehow stumbled into space travel while still mired in tribal savagery. They possessed atomic weapons, and yet their most profound global communications were dedicated to trivialities and emotional outbursts. "They are an anomaly," resonated the thought voice of Elder Vorlag, his military mind reducing the data to its tactical essence. "Their technological advancement is sporadic, illogical. They have achieved faster-than-light travel, yet their primary energy sources remain primitive, volatile. They are a fractured civilization on the brink of self-annihilation. They are not a threat, but a disease that must be cured. Unification is the only logical, compassionate course of action. We will bring them harmony, as we have for all others." The sentiment rippled through the conclave, a wave of serene agreement. The Dominion did not conquer, it healed. It did not destroy, it absorbed. It saw chaos as a form of suffering, and its expansion was an act of galactic therapy. Species that resisted were not met with malice, but with a patient, overwhelming force that disabled their ability to harm themselves and others, integrating them into the greater peace of the Cathar consciousness. It was a process that had never failed. Resistance was always brief, always rooted in fear and ignorance, and always dissolved into the tranquil embrace of unification. Only one mind offered a note of discord. Elder Xylos, the conclave's chief diplomat and philosopher, let his thoughts form with deliberate slowness, a counter-rhythm to the confident cadence of the others. "I have studied the entirety of the human data packet," Xylos projected, his mental voice calm and measured. "And while I see the chaos Vorlag identifies, I also see something else, a pattern hidden within the noise. Every time they have faced an existential threat, they have unified, albeit temporarily. Their periods of greatest technological and philosophical advancement have followed their periods of greatest self-inflicted suffering. They seem to thrive on the edge of the blade. Their chaos is not a symptom of imminent collapse. I fear it may be the very engine of their evolution." Vorlag's thoughts sharpened, laced with a rare hint of impatience. An engine driving them towards a cliff. Their potential is irrelevant. Their actuality is a state of suffering. We have the means to end that suffering. A unification fleet is already positioned at the Veil. A single gesture, a wave of pacification, and their system will fall silent, ready for integration. They will awaken into a peace they could never have achieved on their own. It is our moral imperative. "Is it?" Xylos countered, his question hanging in the silent chamber like a particle of dust in a sunbeam. "Their philosophies speak of a concept they call consent. They value self-determination above harmony. They have a word, freedom, that appears to be the central pillar of their most revered belief systems. To impose our peace upon them without their consent may not be perceived as a gift. It may be perceived as the ultimate violation. The thoughts of a child flailing in a fevered dream are not to be given way." Vorlag dismissed. "We are the physicians. The child does not need to consent to the cure. Apex Conductor, the fleet awaits your command. Let us bring this discordant note into the galactic symphony." All minds turned towards the radiant being at the chamber's center. The apex conductor remained silent for a long moment, its filaments of light pulsing with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The weight of 10,000 conquered worlds rested in its decision, the unblemished record of the Dominion's serene expansion. The humans were a minor issue, a footnote in the grand cosmic design. And yet, Xylos's words had planted a seed of curiosity. The data was indeed perplexing. A species that celebrated its own disharmony was a philosophical paradox. Proceed, Vorlag, the apex conductor finally resonated, its voice encompassing the totality of the conclave. But this unification will be a delicate one. I want their culture preserved in our archives, their art, their music, their chaos. Study it, understand it, then erase it with the gentle hand of peace. Let the fleet advance. Xylos, you will monitor all communications. I wish to understand the nature of their resistance before it is silenced forever. Xylos bowed his consciousness in assent, a profound sense of unease settling deep within his being. The Unification Fleet, a collection of vessels that were less machines and more living embodiments of Cathar will, slipped through the non-space of the continuum. Their hulls were like polished obsidian, drinking the light of distant stars, their forms organic and flowing, like great leviathans of the void. They moved without sound, without propulsion trails, simply ceasing to be in one location and beginning to be in another. Within the lead vessel, the Symphony of Inevitability, Fleet Commander Corridal observed the unfolding of the target system. His mind, an extension of Vorlag's tactical certainty, was calm. He had performed this duty countless times. He would open a channel, declare the Dominion's benevolent intention, and be met with a predictable flurry of fear, bravado, and confused transmissions. Then he would deploy the primary pacification field, a wave of psychic and energetic dampening that would render every system in the vicinity inert, every sentient mind placid and receptive. The entire process would be over in less than a single rotation of the system's primary planet. As they emerged at the heliopause of the star they called Sol, the fleet's sensors reached out, tasting the system's energies. They found what they expected, a chaotic mess of radio waves, primitive satellites, and a few dozen small, inefficiently propelled vessels moving between the inner planets. There was no unified defense grid, no orbital weapon platforms of any significant power, nothing to suggest a species prepared for a galactic reality. Corridal felt a familiar, faint sense of pity. They were so very alone, so very lost in their own noise. He prepared to open the unification channel. And then something impossible happened. From the shadow of the system's 8th planet, a single object detached itself and began to move towards them. It was small, impossibly so. A single vessel. The Cathar sensors, accustomed to reading the elegant energy signatures of their own ships, struggled to interpret it. The vessel was a stark, brutalist shape of lines and angles, a geometric defiance of the graceful curves of Cathar design. It was a dull, non-reflective gray, absorbing sensor pulses without returning a clear image. It moved with a strange, silent grace, not by bending space as the Cathar did, but by a method that the sensors could not even classify. It was simply moving. There was no energy reading from its propulsion, no distortion of space-time. It was just there, and then it was closer. A murmur of confusion, the mental equivalent of a gasp, rippled through the command crews of the fleet. Corridal focused his own senses upon the object. It was clearly a warship, its design radiating a cold, functional purpose. But it was alone. A single ship against a unification fleet that had pacified entire galactic arms. It was not an act of war. It was an act of insanity. The human ship stopped at a precise, respectful distance. It did not power its weapons. It did not raise any visible energy shields. It simply floated in the void, a shard of silence in the face of the grand Cathar symphony. The sheer audacity of the gesture was breathtaking. Corridal found his practiced composure momentarily shaken. Was this a sacrificial lamb, a desperate, symbolic gesture of defiance before the inevitable? He ordered the communications officer to broadcast the standard unification declaration. The message, a complex telepathic and multi-spectrum waveform, explained the Dominion's purpose, its philosophy of peace, and the gift of harmony it was about to bestow upon the Sol system. It was a message that had always been met with panicked broadcasts or defiant but futile threats. The response from the human ship was unexpected. It was not a broadcast across all frequencies, but a narrow, tightly focused beam of communication, directed solely at the Symphony of Inevitability. The transmission was not telepathic, but a modulated signal carrying auditory information. It was a voice. A single male human voice, speaking a translation of a Cathar dialect so perfect it was unsettling. and the voice was utterly, preternaturally calm. "This is Admiral Jian Lee of the United Earthship Resolute," the voice said, the tones even, devoid of fear or aggression. "We have received your declaration. We acknowledge your presence in our sovereign space. Your stated intention is to impose a state you call unification upon our people. We must respectfully decline this offer." Corridal was stunned into silence. Decline? The concept was alien. One did not decline a sunrise. One did not decline the tide. Unification was an inevitability, a fundamental force of galactic evolution as the Cathar saw it. The calm refusal was more jarring than any scream of defiance would have been. "Your vessel is alone," Corridal projected back, his own mental voice now carrying a cold edge of authority. "You face a fleet that represents the will of the Cathar Dominion. Your position is untenable. Your defiance is illogical. It will only result in a more abrupt integration. Power down your systems and prepare to receive the gift of harmony." There was a pause, not a pause of fear or calculation, but of consideration, like a philosopher pondering a difficult question. "The logic of your position is based on an assumption of superior force," the voice of Admiral Lee returned, its serenity unshaken. "Force is a crude metric for interaction. We do not seek conflict. We are here to ensure a dialogue takes place. Your gift is predicated on the belief that your way is the only way. We propose that other ways have value." This was madness, a philosophical debate with a gnat before the footfall of a giant. Corridal felt the eyes of his crew, felt the focused attention of the conclave millions of light years away. Xylos would be analyzing every syllable of this exchange. Vorlag would be demanding action. The honor of the Dominion was at stake. "There will be no dialogue," Corridal declared, his patience exhausted. "There is only the peace of unification or the continued suffering of your chaos. You have made your choice." He gave the command. "Deploy the primary suppression field, target the lone vessel, disable it, let them witness the gentle touch of our power." From the lead ships of the fleet, a wave of shimmering, invisible energy expanded towards the Resolute. It was not a destructive weapon. It was far more elegant. The field was designed to resonate with and nullify all complex energy systems, to overload computational matrices, to dampen power cores, and to induce a state of serene placidity in any biological minds within its radius. It was the first gentle hand of unification. The field washed over the Human Warship, and nothing happened. The dull gray hull did not flicker. The ship did not lose power. No distress calls emanated from it. The field, an energy wave that had silenced fleets and shut down planetary power grids, simply ceased to exist in the space occupied by the human vessel. It was not blocked by a shield. It was not absorbed or deflected. It was as if the very laws of physics that allowed the suppression field to function were momentarily suspended in a bubble around the Resolute. Corridal's mind reeled. He checked the sensor readings, then checked them again. The field had been deployed perfectly. The energy calculations were correct, yet the result was impossible. It was a violation of known physics. The calm voice of Admiral Lee returned, and this time there was a ghost of something new in its tone. Not anger, not triumph. It was disappointment. "That was an unnecessary and hostile act," the voice stated. "We have not threatened you. We have not displayed aggression. We ask you, a final time, to state your peaceful intentions and withdraw beyond our heliopause, or to begin a true dialogue. If you escalate your aggression again, we will be forced to interpret it as a declaration of war." War, the word, was an archaic relic to the Cathar. It implied a conflict between equals, a struggle with an uncertain outcome. The Cathar did not wage war. They brought peace. The impudence of this creature was beyond measure. Humiliation burned in Corridal's mind. The entire fleet, the entire Dominion, was watching. They had been defied by a single primitive ship. "Full power," Corridal commanded, his thought voice sharp as fractured crystal. "Concentrate the suppression fields of the entire forward echelon on that vessel. Overwhelm its systems. I want it inert. Now." A torrent of energy, a focused river of pacifying force 100 times more powerful than the first, converged on the Resolute. The very fabric of space around the human ship seemed to shimmer under the strain. For a moment, Corridal felt a surge of triumph. Nothing could withstand this. No technology, no matter how alien, could simply negate this level of focused energy. The torrent struck, and the universe went silent. The energy did not dissipate. It did not splash against a shield. It vanished. The human ship remained exactly as it was, a calm gray monolith against the stars. But this time something did happen, a subtle change. A single, thin line of pure white light traced itself around the ship's angular hull, as if its geometry was now being defined by a new, absolute law. Then from the Resolute came a response. It was not a weapon firing. It was not a missile or a laser. It was a pulse of nothing, a wave of absolute stillness that expanded outwards. As it passed through the Cathar vessels, their continuum drives sputtered and failed. The gentle gravity wells that held the command crews in place fluctuated wildly. The living crystal of the control interfaces flickered, the light within them dimming. The very connection to the non-space they used for travel was severed. The fleet was paralyzed. They were not damaged, not destroyed. They were simply cut off, adrift, a collection of powerless shells floating in the void. The Cathar fleet, the instrument of galactic pacification, had been pacified by a single, silent ship. A new transmission came from the Resolute. It was no longer just the voice of Admiral Lee. It was a full data packet delivered with the same calm, deliberate focus. It was not weapon schematics. It was not a threat or a demand for surrender. It was a library. It contained human art, paintings of sorrow and joy, sculptures of agony and triumph. It contained their music, symphonies that raged with defiance and sonatas that wept with loss. It contained their history, unflinching records of their genocides, their famines, their world wars, but also their moments of breathtaking sacrifice, their treaties, their charities, their relentless, painful crawl towards a fragile empathy. It was a complete, unvarnished portrait of a species defined by its contradictions, by its capacity for both monstrous cruelty and divine compassion. Within the Nexus conclave, the silence was absolute. The data packet from the human ship played out in the minds of every elder. They witnessed the birth of a human child, the death of a soldier on a battlefield, the creation of a poem, the detonation of a nuclear bomb. They saw a species that lived in a constant state of war with itself, and yet somehow endured. They saw the chaos Xylos had spoken of, but now they saw it not as a flaw, but as a crucible. A furnace that forged something unbreakable. Xylos felt his own consciousness tremble. The Cathar had achieved peace through the eradication of dissent, the elimination of all variables. They had created a perfect static harmony. The humans, they had found strength not in the absence of chaos, but in the mastery of it. They did not eliminate their darkness. They learned to carry it, to draw strength from its contrast with their light. Their peace was not a state of being. It was a constant, conscious choice made every single day in the face of their own worst impulses. It was a peace that was earned, not imposed. Their technology, Vorlag's thought voice was a strained whisper, the certainty shattered. It is not based on energy manipulation. They do not bend the laws of physics. They write them. That field their ship generated, it was a localized redefinition of reality. They did not block our weapon. They created a space where our weapon could not exist. The full implication of that statement settled over the conclave. The Cathar were masters of the existing universe. Humanity, it seemed, were authors of it. The power differential was not one of degree. It was one of kind. The Dominion was a child playing with complex toys. The humans were the beings who had built the nursery. The final part of the human data packet was a simple, direct message from Admiral Lee. "We were once like you," the calm voice explained, now tinged with a profound, ancient weariness. "We once believed that our way was the only way, that our truth was the only truth. We called it by different names, manifest destiny, the greater good, divine right, but it was the same impulse that drives you. The belief that order must be imposed. It led us to the brink of extinction. We nearly burned our world to ash, and in the radioactive glow of our arrogance, we finally learned. We learned that true harmony cannot be forced. It must be chosen. The diversity you see as chaos is our greatest strength. Every voice, even the ones that dissent, adds to the richness of our understanding." The voice paused, and the weight of that pause was heavier than a dying star. "Our power is not a weapon, it is a shield for us and a shield for others, a shy. LD for the right of any people anywhere to choose their own path, even if that path is painful. We stopped your fleet without destroying it to demonstrate this principle. We are not your enemy, but we will not allow you to impose your will upon others. The age of unification is over. A new age is beginning, an age of dialogue. The choice of whether you will be part of it is yours." The transmission ended. The fleet of the Cathar Dominion remained adrift and silent in the void of the Sol system. The single human warship, the Resolute, stood its silent vigil, its thin white line of light a symbol not of aggression, but of an absolute, immovable boundary. The boundary between one way of life and another. In the Nexus Conclave, for the first time in its history, the Apex Conductor felt the chill of true uncertainty. The very foundations of Cathar philosophy, the moral imperative that had driven them for 1,000,000 years, had been fractured. They had dominated galaxies effortlessly, their path a smooth, serene line of expansion. And now that line had come to a full stop. A single warship, representing a chaotic, primitive species, had not defeated them in battle, but had won a war of ideas with a single, calm gesture. Xylos looked at the projected image of the human ship. It was ugly, brutal, and artless by Cathar standards, but he now saw a different kind of beauty in it, the beauty of purpose, the beauty of restraint. It was the physical manifestation of a lesson learned at an unimaginable cost. "We must respond," Xylos projected into the stunned silence. His voice was the only one that held no fear, only a deep, profound sense of revelation. "We must accept their offer of dialogue. We have spent eons speaking. It is time we learned to listen." The days that followed were the most transformative in the history of the Cathar Dominion. The paralyzed fleet was eventually released, its systems restored by another silent pulse from the Resolute. It withdrew, not in shame, but in a state of profound contemplation. Commander Corridal was not punished. He was brought back to the Nexus to add his testimony to the growing understanding of humanity. His mind, once a bastion of tactical certainty, was now a vessel of awe. He spoke of the human's voice, the utter lack of malice, the sense that he was not speaking to a warrior but to a teacher. The dialogue began. It was slow, cautious. The Cathar, for the first time, were not in a position of power. They were the students. Humanity, through the calm, dispassionate voice of Admiral Lee and the diplomatic corps that followed, began to explain. They did not boast of their power. They spoke of their suffering. They spoke of the dark ages, of their world wars, of their Cold War, where they held the power to annihilate themselves for decades, and every single day chose not to. They explained that their mastery over the fabric of reality was a direct result of this history. Their science had been forced to look beyond conventional energy and matter, driven by the desperate need to find solutions that were not weapons, to find technologies that could build and protect, not just destroy. They had learned to manipulate causality, to reinforce spacetime, to create shields of conceptual principle, because they were terrified of what they would do with a bigger sword. Their ultimate power was born from their ultimate fear of themselves. Xylos became the Dominion's primary liaison. He spent vast cycles in conversation with the human diplomats. He learned of their art, which celebrated imperfection. He learned of their ethics, which were not a set of rigid rules but a constant, agonizing process of balancing conflicting values. He learned of their governance, a chaotic mess of competing interests that somehow, against all odds, produced a resilient and adaptive whole. He saw that humanity was not a single entity, but a vast, interconnected ecosystem of ideas, constantly in flux, constantly evolving. The Cathar were a crystal, perfect and unchanging. Humanity was a star, a churning ball of nuclear fire that created light and life from its own internal chaos. A tentative alliance began to form, not one of military necessity, but of philosophical curiosity. Cathar emissaries were invited to Earth. They walked, shielded by personal fields, through the chaotic, vibrant human cities. They saw the poverty and the pollution, but they also saw the museums filled with masterpieces, the concert halls filled with transcendent music, the public parks where children of all different appearances played together. They saw a species that had not solved its problems, but had learned to live with them, to constantly strive against them, and to find meaning in that very struggle. The Cathar, who had believed meaning was found in the absence of struggle, were forced to reconsider the very nature of existence. The Apex Conductor, in a gesture that shook the Dominion to its core, formally renowned, said the doctrine of unification. It declared that the harmony of the galaxy would not be found in a single, homogeneous note, but in a grand, complex chord of different civilizations, each playing its own part. The Dominion would no longer be a conqueror, it would be a partner. It was during the first joint scientific expedition, on a vessel crewed by both Cathar and humans, that the final, most profound secret was shared. Xylos was present, alongside Admiral Lee, who was finally seen not as a disembodied voice but as a physical person, a man with graying hair and eyes that held the quiet weight of his entire species' history. They were in the ship's observation chamber, a dome of transparent material looking out onto the starfield. "There is a reason we developed as we did," Admiral Lee said, his voice as calm in person as it had been over the comms. A reason for our caution, our philosophy of restraint, and the nature of our technology. It was not entirely by our own design. He gestured to the star chart that filled the dome. Centuries ago, when our radio astronomy was in its infancy, we received a signal. It was not from our galaxy. It was from the intergalactic void, a tightly compressed burst of information traveling for millions of years. The star chart shifted. Points of light representing entire galaxies began to wink out, one by one. The signal was a library, Lee continued, his voice low and somber. A tombstone. It contained the final records of thousands of civilizations from a dozen different galaxies, all of them different, all of them unique, and all of them gone. Xylos felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the vacuum of space outside. He watched as the simulated galaxies vanished into darkness. They were extinguished, Lee said. Not by war, not by plague, not by any conventional force. They were erased by something they called the static. An entity, a force, a law of nature we do not know. It is a form of entropy that targets information. It consumes complex, ordered systems. It erases existence, leaving behind nothing, not even the memory of what was lost. The simulation showed a faint, creeping corruption at the edge of a galaxy. It was not a violent explosion, but a slow, inexorable fading, like ink bleeding into paper, turning everything to a uniform, featureless gray. The final message in the signal was a warning, Lee stated. The static is drawn to predictable, homogeneous systems. The more ordered a civilization becomes, the more of a single mind, a single energy signature it possesses, the more visible and appetizing it is to this consumer of reality. A perfectly unified galaxy would be like a beacon in the darkness for it. The truth struck Xylos with the force of a physical blow, rearranging his entire understanding of the cosmos. The Cathar Dominion's grand project of unification, their noble quest to bring peace and harmony to the galaxy, was in fact an act of cosmic suicide. They had been meticulously preparing a feast for an unimaginable predator. They had spent eons making their galaxy the perfect, most easily digestible meal. Our chaos, Lee said, his eyes meeting Xylos's, our fragmentation, our constant internal conflict, it became our shield. We are unpredictable. Our energy signature as a civilization is a storm of white noise. We are difficult to target, difficult to define. When we learned of the static, we stopped trying to cure our chaos. We embraced it as our only defense. Our technology is not designed to fight the static. You cannot fight a concept. It is designed to reinforce reality, to strengthen the informational integrity of existence itself. The Resolute did not project a field of force at your fleet. It projected a field of certainty, a pocket of absolute reality that your technology, which subtly bends reality, could not penetrate. The lone human warship had not been guarding the Sol system from the Cathar. It had been a sentinel, a silent watcher on the edge of the galactic night, listening for the approach of the true, final enemy. Humanity had not stopped the Dominion out of moral superiority or a desire to protect the freedom of lesser races. They had stopped the Cathar to save them from a fate far worse than conquest. They had stopped them to save the entire galaxy from being wiped from the pages of existence. Xylos turned back to the star chart, the glittering spiral of their home galaxy now seeming impossibly fragile, a beautiful, intricate sandcastle sitting just before an incoming tide of absolute nothingness. The Cathar's effortless domination now seemed like the hubris of a child playing with fire in a house made of dry paper. The fear he had once felt of humanity's power was gone, replaced by a much deeper, colder, and more profound terror. It was the fear of a silent, unthinking universe that did not care for life, for harmony, or for existence itself. "So you knew," Xylos said, his voice barely a whisper, "all this time you have carried this burden alone." "Alone, we are insufficient," Admiral Lee replied, his gaze fixed on the darkness between the galaxies. "The static is patient, it is vast. One species, one philosophy is not enough to stand against it. The warning we received was the last act of 1,000 dead cultures. Their final hope was that someone, somewhere, would learn from their mistakes, that a new kind of galactic community could be forged, not one of homogeneity, but of diversity. A chorus of so many different voices that the silence could never drown it out. The grand, epic tale of the Cathar Dominion, the bringers of peace, was over. A new story was beginning, a desperate, uncertain story. The story of a galaxy that had been saved from itself, only to be confronted with the specter of its own oblivion. Their only hope lay in an alliance with the strange, chaotic, and profoundly powerful species they had so arrogantly underestimated. a species that had learned, through fire and sorrow, that the only true strength in the universe was not the power to control, but the courage to coexist. The real war was not for the galaxy. It was for the right of the galaxy to exist at all, and it had just begun.